my time speaking and enjoy the rest of the evening listening to others speaking.
And how was?
Good.
I'm glad to hear.
I did my usual over preparation, tried to bring it up in my phone, realized it wasn't going to work, and stuck the phone in my back pocket and just talked.
Sometimes there's something about the confidence knowing that you have the information with you or on you if you need to. But then I knew this guy that would when he would go see apartments, he would keep in his pocket like a wad of cash, and that would give him sort of the confidence to remind himself, like, if I want to buy it, I can buy it, but I don't have to buy it. And like, that's a little intense to walk around with a wad of cash, and you're also exposing yourself to get mugged. But either way,
advertise that.
Exactly. And this friend's name was right. Okay. So, chapter 3. This is a biggie, and I think we'll probably do a portion today and a portion next week as well. Like, I don't know if we're going to go through the whole thing. And obviously, anyone watching is welcome to join. And I see some of our usual characters are not here right now, but it's okay. They could always catch on, and I'm sure they're with us in spirit. So, chapter 3. Can I ask you, Sandy, to please read?
Sure. Do you want the opening page with the Bible references?
Yeah, let's start with the Bible references. They're from the Bible at the end of the day. So,
I am the Lord your God. Exodus 20, verse 2. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6, 4. See now that I am he, and no other God matches me. Deuteronomy 32, 39. You shall have no other gods before me. Exodus 20, verse 3.
Right. So these are classic verses. Obviously, the Bible's full of many of these, but it's important to really note, and we're gonna go through all of these right now, which is, while a lot of these, the Noahide laws, we've spoken about how they come from like a negative perspective, so to speak. At the end of the day, we're being invited into a relationship with God. And while we're talking about it from like a negative perspective, it could always be flipped on its head, right? So if we're going to be talking about how one should, and we're going to see one should be careful about, how they speak or how they dress. The flip side of that is you should be very mindful of what you wear or how you speak could also benefit you and benefit others and bring you closer to God. So there's always this flip side to the negative that we could be looking at it from a positive light. And we're really going to dive into now this concept of idolatry, and on the flip side, how we bolster our relationship with God as well. So let's start with number 1. So I'll take this. Belief in the existence and the oneness of God is an inheritance of the nation of Israel. The power of this belief has obligated all members of the nation of Israel to announce to the whole world not to worship other gods. So we read this in our orientation, how the first Rashi, or well, not the first Rashi, but the Rashi talking about the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the translation he has, or the interpretation he has, which is less of a declaration of monotheism, but more about a mission statement, which is he mentions how it's the God of Israel, and eventually it will be the God of all the nations. And there's a sense over here. Well, we need to remember that in the Bible, there's no discussion with God to the people, the other nations of the world, about not worshiping other gods, right? There's no requirement where God comes to them, stop doing this. And we famously see with Jonah, when Jonah comes to Nineveh, repent, but there isn't a discussion where like no more idol worship. And there's a certain sense which that was a relationship that was developed with the nation of Israel. Ideally, that the nation of Israel comes to its land, and then by leading by example represents what it's like to have a relationship with God, and the world would then see what it looks like to have and to believe in one God. However, now in these days, when the Noahide movement is gaining some traction, the people of Israel are back on their land. There is a place now to once again start having this discussion where I and others go out to the nations of the world and actually start saying it's time to come home and believe in one God, and yes, come out with a more clear voice saying there is only one God, and this is the way we worship him. And in this chapter, we're going to learn also what not to do. But if for a long time this was something that Israel sort of had its own private relationship, it is high time for this to be promulgated to the whole world. I'd also mention over here, just in general, there's a profound understanding in Judaism, and perhaps in other religions as well, which is the way you see God is the way you see other people as well. And if you have this relationship with this vengeful or hateful or very judgmental God, that is going to affect your relationship with others as well. And we need to realize that if you are living in a world, well, the philosophers thought that, if God is everywhere, so there's no real room for anyone else. Hence, God doesn't really exist, because obviously we're here and we're sort of, quote unquote, eating up that space. However, in Jewish teachings via Kabbalah, we talk about tzimtzum, the retraction of God. God retracted himself in a certain sense and allowed there to be space for others to experience this amazing world he created for us. And then we see that manifest again with Abraham. Abraham has his tent, which is cleared out and opened to the people of the world for them to come in to this space. So he creates a space, empties it out to allow others to come in. So that would be an example of how Abraham's relationship with God then manifests, and he embodies that himself, dealing with actual humans in the real world. Number 2, Sandy, do you mind?
No, I don't mind. The purpose of life is to know God. Included in this knowledge are fear of God and love of God. Love of God includes, among other things, any activity or guidance that brings faith into people's hearts.
So that's a beautiful, the last sentence over there is very beautiful, saying how like the love in God it includes, loving the other and bringing out love in the others. And then we even see this in a certain sense, even when God is upset and when Adam and Eve get punished and removed from the Garden of Eden. Before that happens, God still makes them these garments of skin, right, for them to wear. And there's this caring God that is still very much seeing us and caring for us. And there's a sense over here where you have this spectrum from fear to love, and that's where this relationship between God is always happening. However, fear doesn't necessarily mean, I'm scared of a parent or I'm scared of a judge necessarily. While there is an interpretation where you should be wary of the judgment that God might bestow upon you, generally speaking, fear should be seen as awe, right? And that is that could provoke many positive emotions, right? So I could be awestruck, but that then leads to me having loving feelings or admiration feelings. There's also a sense where fear is, again, not the fear from the parent getting upset or the spouse getting upset, but rather fear of disappointing the other, right? I'm fearing that I didn't reach my full potential. I wasn't there. I missed the mark, which is what's called a sin, a chet, right? A chet is to miss. And that is the fear. The fear is that I'm not fully who I could be. I'm not tapping into my full potential. And that's why the relationship between me and God hasn't reached its full potential. They say that when Jacob was fleeing his father's house due to the whole Esau brouhaha, he leaves, falls asleep, and he has the famous dream about Jacob's ladder. I might have mentioned this in the past, and how the Midrash talks about how the angels that were coming up and down wanted to harm Jacob. And the reason was because they said the Jacob that we see down here on the land doesn't resemble the Jacob that we see in heaven. And the sense is that we all have a version of us in heaven, so to speak, which is our full potential. And if we're not climbing up that ladder, if we're not doing our best to try to reach that full potential, not that the angels are going to hurt us, but seemingly we are really not experiencing life to its fullest. And at that point, you could start getting a little confused and looking at the things that are happening to you as punishment. You could start fearing God because of that. So again, there's a spectrum that's going back and forth, and love and fear, I would say, are two of the main attributes that we could be tapping into with our relationship with God. All right, Jonathan, you want to take us on number 3?
Sure. Whoever loves God does so through knowledge of him, and so the greater the understanding, the greater the love. It is therefore fitting for a person to acquire as much wisdom as possible.
Also, I mean, I love all these verses. They're all great. And so Rihal, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, who we've mentioned in the past, he sees that there are 3 ways to sort of know or acknowledge God. One would be the Torah. Obviously, that's a classic, the manifestation of his word, which in a certain sense, if Christians take Jesus to eventually, turning the word into flesh, Judaism sees it as that's sort of the end of development. And rather, if you keep it still in the realm of word, right, both how you express yourself with the wind coming out of your mouth and the fact that the word itself could be interpreted in different ways, that allows much more room for infinite interpretations and growth. And again, quote unquote, locking down God into flesh, to me and other Jews, seems quite curious. So we said there's the Torah, Rihal says. There is looking at the world through the lens of science, so to speak, and seeing God manifest in that way. And then looking at the world around you, not necessarily through the scientific lens, but rather looking around and trying to see what Moses saw about God's back, is sort of seeing how the invisible hand, so to speak, is making its way through life. So I'm sure Sandy, and I'm sure you, Jonathan, have your own experiences where in retrospect you realize, wow, there must have been a guiding hand over here. There must have been someone else involved, and be aware of those things where you could also see God there. In a certain sense, it's also very personal when you get to experience it in that way. Now, another seemingly shocking line over here is in the last line, it is therefore fitting for a person to acquire as much wisdom as possible. And this is really an invitation to recognize that with no real knowledge, we're really tapping into our lizard brain, so to speak, or our animalistic self. As in, the cat that covers his droppings, right? That's not because he's like, well, what are people going to think about me, right? This is really just him being an animal. So if I decide to not ask questions, as we see in certain religions, and just take it as blind faith, there's something about that which is animalistic in a certain sense, which I'm just going blind based on my intuition. However, Judaism, and as we see in this verse over here, also offering obviously to the Noahides as well, which is no. The name is Israel, which is wrestling with God. Ask questions, inquire. Of course, this means do so in the right setting and do so with the right teachers. But the invitation is to ask more, because the more you comprehend, the more you will acknowledge and the more you will know about God. So there's a true sense over here of exploration. And we could discuss a little later on how one needs to be careful about that. But the invitation is open to all. As they say specifically about the Torah in the Talmud, the Torah is lying in the corner. Anyone who wants it is welcome to come and pick it up. The invitation is for us to engage constantly and not be nervous that things might be complicated, or that we want to we want to challenge certain elements. Rihal also famously, the Ramchal famously said that one needs to go through multiple levels of heresy to make it through to the other end. And you could say how that would be very scary for us to offer to someone, again, with its own caveats and prerequisites. Nevertheless, the invitation is for us to explore and engage. All right, number 4. Let me scroll down on my screen over here. Okay, here we go. So number 4 is the individual is meant to serve only the creator of the world and no other entity, right? So there'll be a few hints over here talking about JC as we could see over here. But the concept is to really don't be subservient to the other entity, right? The idea is to trust in God, and that kind of trust also allows, in a certain sense, someone to also sort of be relaxed in his own way. Be very sure about your relationship with God. Be very content with your relationship with God. Again, going back to what we said, number 3, you could be very content with your relationship with God and still have questions and still ask and still inquire. But the attitude is to feel very confident, which is there's only one, there's only him. This is the main relationship that you're trying to have. And in a certain sense, also the Sabbath is giving you that perspective, right? You're going to be locked in this rat race, so to speak. And there's a moment one day a week where you're supposed to recognize how you need to be relaxed, calm, and confident in the decision you made. Just like I'm confident that my business will be there on Sunday and that the world will still be there on Sunday, because I've recognized the 6 days following. Here too, my relationship with God I should be confident that there's only one, that after Sabbath, he's still only going to be one. And that is what the relationship is going to stay like. 5, therefore, the Torah commands every person not to engage in ritual worship except in worship of God. Any other form of worship is forbidden and is known as idol worship or idolatry, right? So first off, as I think the word over here, worship, is mentioned like 4 times. What is worship? So there's idolatry worship, which we'll get into a moment in number 7, I believe. But worship means in Hebrew, it's avodah Hashem, which literally means, the translation would be to work. And to work means learning more and getting closer. Just like, and this is not to sit down and just say like, constantly be bowing down and calling out for God. Rather, it's a lifelong relationship development, just like we have, or not just like, but akin to what you have with a spouse, so to speak, or a child, where it's not you wake up in the morning, you say, I'm your dad or I'm your mother, and that's basically the end of the work that needs to be done. Rather, there's constant reaffirmation, and as the child grows and as the parent grows, or the spouses grow, that constantly needs to be re-examined and rechecked and make sure that you're on the same baseline. So that's worship means not just necessarily bowing down, but it means developing the relationship with God. So that would be the positive. The negative we're seeing over here is saying, don't do any of that, obviously, with some other entity, and which involves a tremendous amount of your time and attention. Sandy, I see a question.
Yeah. I was looking at, in the next few, actually, when I was looking ahead, I was thinking back to something my brother-in-law said. I can't remember if he said it directly to me or if it was in relation. He's a pastor, minister. Something he had said to somebody who'd lost their husband recently, which was, he said, you don't talk to somebody that's dead. And she was like, well, I'm not. She said, I'm just kind of walking around the house doing things I normally do and chattering like I would have, as if he was still here. So I have a question, as in, because I find myself doing that at times, but it feels like it sits in the same place, like, I'm one of those weird people who, even when I was at church, I was like, no, I don't pray to Jesus. I pray to God, because Jesus prayed to God. God is God. And I don't even really talk to him. I mean, maybe occasionally I'd say something directed at a thought or something. So I guess my question is, where is the line between worship of God and how we give, worth and respect to those that we are, our family, husband, wife, the people, like, how do you manage that? And this other lady and myself cannot be the only people stuck going, gee, what am I actually doing if I find myself making a comment because I'm cleaning something up or I'm doing this or that? And you're talking to your partner who's now gone, but I'm not really thinking of it at all in the same respect as I do when I talk to God. I'm talking to God. It's different. But how do you know it's different? Or how do you gauge that?
That's a very, very good question. And even there, one has to be careful, because ultimately, these are all words, right? God transcends all these things. Even the word God itself could be problematic, because it really depends. Like you're comfortably now saying like, but I'm talking to God. And then one would ask like, well, if what your thought process isn't oriented, even that could be problematic, because what is this God that you're doing? Now, the words we use, worship, work, relationship, these are terms that we recognize from our day-to-day life as humans, right? There's only so much we could actually fathom and comprehend with our limited existence and intellectual capabilities. So we are required to, in a certain sense, appropriate some words that we have with other people, and then try to elevate that and orient that towards God. However, like Maimonides says, when you said, but I'm talking to God, sort of in your head, you need to know who doesn't have a face, who doesn't have a body, who doesn't look like me, who, like, all the things that he's not, because that at least allows you to create a void again, sort of like God creates that void, a space where new things can come in. What those new things are, every individual has his own interpretation of that. But the sense is that I'm clearing it out from all the things that it's not. So the thing that comes in, hopefully, once I've already controlled for all the things that it's not, what's coming in is pure. What's coming in is resonating with my soul. And then I would say that if that's you feeling that me speaking to God is different than me speaking to my sister, then that's what you're tapping into. But categorizing it and giving it a name is very difficult, obviously, and sometimes could even rub up against the concept of potential idol worship, because you are now taking this concept and saying, no, this is it.
It's a difficult question to even ask because of that.
Correct. But we ask questions. All right. Number 6 is, I'm trying to think how deep we want to get into this, but this is a controversial one. It is forbidden to worship another entity while also worshiping the Creator. The prohibition is called shituf, i.e. sharing sovereignty with God, and includes the Christian belief that encourages worship of a man, i.e. Jesus, in addition to God. Okay, now, if you look at the footnotes, you're going to see that there are different opinions about this, ones that we've discussed, again, sort of briefly in our orientation. And what I would say is this. The official position of the Noahide World Center of, let's say, Brit is you should be focusing on your relationship with only God. There isn't sort of, in today we live in a culture where people are more open with open relationships. But in Judaism, that concept is there's one relationship, there's only God. And I think at this time of the Noahide movement, the call out is to everyone, but we're looking to reach out to people that are looking to really take on this kind of relationship with the one true God. However, there are opinions that say that worshiping another God, worshiping another entity, that is, as long as you recognize that its power stems from God and it's secondary to God, there is more room to accommodate such a relationship. And then the question would be, for how long, in what case? And there's a sense where also the Torah is not trying to create more attention necessarily for you and your family. So there's a sense where it could be for an individual. I would say, like, again, my general comment would be only worship God. Now, Sandy comes to me after this conversation and says, listen, Chazi, I'm with you, but my cousins, my family are in this. We're going to church. We're doing that. This is the language I'm using. Can I still be using that language? So for that particular case, maybe we will lean on the other opinions that are more open to this concept, or the ones that look, like we mentioned, the Meiri, who sees Christianity as considered a Noahide, and all the ramifications that come from there as well. So again, there are different opinions. I would say the official attitude is that one should be aiming to the highest level, purest level of a relationship, and not need these intermediaries. However, there's a sense where, if there's a Noahide and he used to be First Nations and he wants to be talking to me about the spirit animals, so in the right context, you could be like, okay, that's all good. That's fine. Once we recognize that when we say, the spirit of the bear is in him, we don't actually mean that he's a bear, and we don't mean that we worship the bear. Rather, the idea of what a bear symbolizes and those energies, there's a place to, as long as we recognize where those are all stemming from. Again, if anyone watching, or Jonathan or you, want to dive a little more into this, we could do that, I would say, sort of as a side thing. But generally speaking, one should, and this is sort of, you could see what they're writing over here is the official opinion. If you look at the footnotes, they obviously still leave it open to different levels of discussion. And this also varies between different Noahide groups. And again, I would stress that there are some very observant Noahides that hear this and they sort of want to have nothing to do with this. I just left Jesus. Don't talk to me about how you could sort of still bring him in from the back door. However, we still need to be sensitive to the people that are still struggling through their journey or still making their way through it. And for us to just shut the door in their face would also be wrong. So it's a delicate path to walk. And I think personally, once this hits a critical mass, there could be a more open conversation than with sort of other rings or levels of the spectrum of the Noahide and his relationship. Obviously, we're all hoping ultimately everyone will call out to God's name in one accord, and it will be as clear as day who we are worshiping, the one and only God. Seven. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I share a thought on that, or would that be just probably not wise?
Sure. I mean, it won't be wise, that I can't tell you, but we're here to listen. So
I've been thinking about a couple of things. First, I'll say is that I wrote to a rabbi recently with a question around, my questions and things I've talked about in a couple of other spots, coming out of Christianity as somebody who, I assume I'm coming out of Christianity. I don't know that I've been in it properly. And at the same time, so two things. Ages ago, let's see, a couple of decades back, my sister, the minister's wife, she wrote to me a note, and I don't remember why she wrote it, but she talked about when we were kids, like when we were in our teens. I was 15 and she was 13. We went to a Bible camp that my mom had sent us to because it had horses, because, why else would you? But there were horses. Being challenged with the altar call there, I had this massive argument with God because I've been praying to God since I was about 4 and not really taught appropriately how to do that or not do that, just was. So I was the one who came home from camp and said, so they taught us this. And basically I had this argument with God. He said something to me and I went up to the front because I had made him a promise not to disrespect Jesus. Not that which is why I ask some very strange and difficult questions at times. that's been on my mind, and that's what I wrote to the rabbi about, was that particular incident and where I'm at right now with it. The other thing relating to that incident was that like 20 something years later, my sister wrote me this letter, and she said to me, because I think we were talking about my mom's anger. My mom got really angry at my explanation of what went down at camp. And so my sister said to me, she said, I went back to camp and became a Christian the following year based on the fact that you had this argument with mom. And the level of her anger was so intense that even though I had no clue what you guys were arguing about, I thought it must have been something important. So I am going to watch Sandy for the entire next year. And based on what I observe in, my attitudes, my actions, and whatever, she said, I either will go back and do the same or not. So out of that, I took away this thing that, there's a lot of emotion around certain discussions and points as we worship God and as we relate to God and others. But for me, at least, my main takeaway was what my attitude is and how my actions play out are telling people things that my mouth is not even saying. And that's my main thing. That's vital to my relationship with God, because whatever people are taking out of that is how they're going to see him.
True words couldn't be said, which is this is why there's a concept in Judaism called Chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name. And generally speaking, in Judaism, there's different levels of transgressions. And it depends on the level of intent. However, when it comes to desecrating God's name, even if you did so mistakenly, it's considered as if you did it with intent. Because once you're playing at that level and you recognize that people are watching you and see you as a representative of God, people are watching you and they're going to look at your actions. And are you walking the walk, or are you just, talking the talk? And there's a real sense over there of responsibility. There is a difference specifically with Jewish law, how Noahides and Jews take that on. However, it is important to remember that, yes, people are watching you, and that is very much how in Jewish thought we're supposed to be having this conversation and showing the world what we believe. Not like the JWs, where we're going to people's houses and knocking on the door. Rather, it's practice what you preach, and the world will see. And obviously, the ideal is the individual, the family, the neighborhood, the community, the nation, all the world. So I agree, and I thank you for sharing. I see we lost Jonathan. He's told me that he'll be coming back shortly. I see Yosef is here. Yosef, good to see you, sir. I see Lynn is over here. It's great to see you as well. And I see Jacob is here. I am most concerned with Noahides condemning their family members. Yes, so this is alluding to what we spoke about in Shituf, that even the Noahides that they have fortunately have no need anymore for their old gods or their old relationships. They should and need to be patient, compassionate with their other brothers, and at the very least recognize that there are other opinions out there that create more space for these family members. So yes, definitely we must show respect and love to our fellow members of generally the whole world, but definitely your family as well. Okay, number 7. You mind taking this, Sandy?
I can read it. Forbidden ritual practices not for the Creator's sake include prostration, animal slaughter, burning a sacrifice or incense, and pouring of a libation. Similarly, any ritualized recitation that recognizes lordship of another entity, such as the words, "You are my God," is also forbidden. All these practices are prohibited, and they all incur punishment, even when they are not customary among other members of the associated religion.
Okay, so here again, we're seeing it as the negative of what not to do. But in a certain sense, it's also framing to us what worship looks like, right? What's actually happening over here. And in a certain sense, they're representing like the different aspects of the human being. I'm just going to get rid of this comment of the human being. So we have our physical body and our existence. So this is the prostration, which is bowing or submitting your actual body, right, down. So yes towards God, no towards any other God, right? So this would be like, this is a big no-no. Also to Noahides, any sort of action which is, you are submitting your body to such an act. Okay, so number one. Number two over here is we have the animal slaughter over here. And here too, we don't really have this so much around the world anymore, but there's a sense, at least in Judaism, which is cutting the animal's throat, the windpipe. That is also where eating comes. You also eat the sacrifice later. It's going through your mouth. You're cutting it in the throat. That's where wind comes from. And this is sort of where the spirit is, right? So this is submitting your spirit towards God. Okay, so this is also a big no. On the flip side, this would be the way to worship God properly as we do in the temple. Then we also have here the incense that we talked about over here, about bringing a sacrifice or incense. And this is to affect our spirituality and our intellect, taking in the smell and all it does to our neurons, to our brain, to our spirit. There's a sense that this is supposed to represent one's spiritual submission towards God. And we also have over here the pouring of libations, which again is not really happening so much anymore, but it's the act of overflowing out. So this too is we're pouring ourselves out into the world in a certain sense, right? And it takes the first three to allow us then to do like really the fourth is sort of a culmination of that, which is if I did all those three things, I fully submitted myself and I'm pouring myself out to God. So again, in the negative, we're saying all these things will be very, very problematic and prohibited for Jews and Noahides as well. And it ends over here with, you could say like the fifth one, which is this declaration, right? So here you could be like, I'm not bowing down. I'm not cutting anything. I'm not doing anything spiritual. But here too, it's still a problem to just come out with these words and you're sort of coming out and declaring to the whole world that this is my God, right? So these would be the classic examples of prohibited worship, right? And this is, like we said earlier, what is this worship, avodah, that we're doing? It would be with my body, my soul, my spirit. All of this is submitting myself towards God in proper orientation or towards idolatry in improper orientation.
I have to think about this one a lot, I can see.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Because I say, I don't pray to Jesus. At the same time, I've gone to church for most of my life, which means, yeah, you probably have.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that, because we're going to see shortly that. So here we're saying these are the big no-nos. However, as far as participating in church or doing certain other things, again, there are different opinions and some lenient positions that allow for more wiggle room. And again, this is not because it's the ideal, but rather the Torah understands and God understands in this relationship with the Noahides, sort of how it is in a certain sense, a slow journey one needs to make. And that comes with certain amount of allowances. All right. So moving on to number 8. So too, it is forbidden to pray to any entity other than God, or to perform any ritualistic act, such as a ritualized dance, wearing special clothes, or other such customs, as is performed by idol worshippers. Such forbidden acts also incur punishment as well. So here too, we're talking about very active moves, right? I'm putting something on. I'm doing this dance, so to speak, again, that is connected to this idol worship. We're not talking about, there's nothing wrong with doing the moonwalk, right? It's more about doing the moonwalk on the stage when people are saying, you know, the demons are leaving me, so to speak. So that's where it becomes more problematic. As far as Jewish law is concerned, this is less intense than number 7 with regards to the punishment you incur, but it's still problematic nonetheless. Again, the main worship problem over here we're talking about are these 4/5 elements. The 8th one also, it's more frowned upon, still problematic, but it's less direct submission of your whole body to this foreign god.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Feel free to laugh at me. Yeah, so I think I was 10 years on a worship team at church.
Okay.
And one of the places I thought a lot about some of the how and why is because of having a deaf son. There were some of the songs that I would use my hands to sing to God. And yeah, I'm not kidding. These are places that I want to think through quite a bit in terms of things I've talked to God about on a personal level and things I intend to talk about on a personal level and consider, because that for me goes back to that. Yeah. Oh, crap. I wiped a couple of subtle tears away at the beginning when you were reading the first few, because I was thinking about that place where God is anger and
love.
And something somebody said to me last night after telling my story was about being kind. And that's one of the main things I see in God. In that place where his anger exists and his love exists to me, I see his kindness. It kind of resonates between those two, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. I mean, this is we'll get to this in I think number 14, I believe, actually. Okay. Whoever believes there is a God ruling over the entire world other than the one creator. So this is really sort of an attack on dualism and the concept of, you know, are the bad things that are happening to me, or let's say, you know, you could see that as bad things, or this is like sort of like some evil entity doing this to me, or recognize that even God's anger is really God's love, ultimately speaking, that I, as a human, register as anger, but nevertheless, I'm having a relationship, I'm being spoken to. And again, like I mentioned, when Adam and Eve, God is clearly not happy about the situation. Nevertheless, he still gives them those garments of skin, because the attitude is, I'm not leaving you helpless. Yeah. Even the famous story of Cain and Abel. So there's the mark of Cain, and there is an interpretation, a midrash, that says that the mark of Cain in Hebrew, it's ot, and ot means letter. And the sense is that God put a letter on Cain and let him know that while, yes, you're sort of being pushed out, ultimately all the letters come back into creating words, into creating the Torah, and they come back into the fold. And the attitude is that I gave Cain a mark so he could recognize at some point you should fully manifest your potential, like we said, and with that letter come back into the fold and create a word again, be part of humanity again. So even when God is punishing us, it is very much still with love and attempting to constantly bring us closer to him.
Mm-hmm. You're up. I kind of dropped. Asked a question. I said we're further back. If you were looking on the page.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm looking. I'm looking where we were at 9. No. Yeah, we were at 9. Yes. Okay. Although additional ritualized forms of worship are also forbidden, they do not incur punishment unless specifically associated with idol worship. However, regarding animal sacrifice, burning of incense, prostration, and pouring of libation, punishment is incurred even when not associated with idol worship. Okay, so basically the first portion over here, it's talking about if it's done in the wrong context, right? So, and this goes back to what you're sort of alluding to, what if I, there's additional versions of ritual. And again, it's not the ideal. We shouldn't be going down that path. But the Torah is less intense about this, because again, they realize that this is sort of happening on a surface level and not, like we said earlier, which is a real form of worship, right? The libation, the sacrifice, and all the sort of like CBT in a certain sense. You're not taking all these elements of yourself and focusing it on this idol worship. So again, if it's done in the wrong context, it's still considered problematic. If it's not, then these things are still frowned upon, but they do not incur punishment. And that is not supposed to be an invitation to someone to be like, guess what? It's okay. It's more about, don't be too hard on yourself if you're still in this part of your journey, because you should recognize that while there's some things that you cannot do, there's some things that are still sort of quote unquote kosher. Number 10, any form of idol worship that incurs punishment in Beit Din, rabbinical court of law, incurs punishment in Noahide court law as well. So this is just letting us know that we are simpatico. This is true to the Jews as well. Obviously, people should recognize that one, we no longer have a Beit Din anymore, right? So while the ultimate judge is God, right, not humans. However, God is inviting us and asking us to purge these things from within us. Having said that, we are no longer at that level. In certain senses, I believe that we're at a higher level. In other senses, I believe we're at a lower level. But either way, we still have a lot of sin inside of us. So we have to be careful before coming out and judging other people at this day and age. And secondly, even if that was the case, that we did have a system like that, also people should not be too worried, because famously it is said that a deadly courthouse based in would sentence someone to death once every 70 years. And the reason of this is because there are tremendous amounts of requirements before we judge someone. Was he aware? Was he fully aware of what he was doing? Were there two witnesses? Did they warn him? But there's a whole list of what happens. And even then, sometimes if he admits to all those things, the judges will say, then you must be crazy, because only a crazy person would do all this stuff. And because you're crazy, then you didn't really have intent. So we still don't punish you. So the Torah is not looking to punish people. Even the famous lashes, the 40-1 lashes that one has to go through, if it's not to embarrass someone, right? So if one faints or soils themselves during this, then they stop, because we're not here to put you in the town square for everyone to laugh like Quasimodo. Rather, we're here for the idea is for you to learn a lesson, so to speak. Well, not so to speak, to actually learn a lesson. Number 11, Jonathan, if you're back with us, you want to take this one?
Sure. The prohibition of idol worship includes worship of any power, whether spiritual or physical, whether it exists in reality or is a product of the imagination alone.
So I hope no Mormons here will take too much offense, but I would say the product of your imagination, once we're talking about aliens already. So at that point, really here too, you could be like, well, this is just like a fantastical story. Nevertheless, if someone is deep into Harry Potter land, thinking that he's a muggle, then you're starting to rub up against problematic thought, right? There's a place for imaginary thought, and there's a place where you start to put that on a pedestal and think about it as an actual option. And it's ultimately a question of what are you submitting yourself to? And like we said earlier, Sandy, even the word God itself can be problematic if you are fully submitting yourself to this concept that you built up in your head, right? Because it's all happening in this realm at the end of the day, and that's where the relationship is happening. So one has to be very careful how he's doing this. So whether it's physical or imaginatory, you have to be very sensitive to this. Number 12, included in this prohibition is worship of human being or other force. It is the worship of a human being or other forces. I think it should say forces. It says here's another force. In any of the manners described above, even if the worshiper believes that the human being or the other force is not created, but is the creator himself, right? So you could come and say okay, I get it, no idol worship, but what if, this is Jesus, this is actual God? So again, like we said, there are different opinions about this, right? Whether this is problematic or not. But generally speaking, if you look at North Korea, right, the way they look at the supreme leader there, or you look at Thailand, these are current, the king in Thailand, these are current examples, but definitely 300-400 years ago, if you think about, let's say, the kings of England, right, the attitude was, this person is blessed by God and has God's power, and people worshipped these elements. So most of this is not a problem for us anymore, excluding Jesus. In the world today, we don't really have people going around really worshiping these people. And even if LeBron James, people use the term of like, I worship him, but no one thinks he's a god. Nevertheless, like places like in North Korea, not that I fully know what's going on over there, but if they truly think that the supreme leader has like magical powers and he's like this deity, then yes, that is obviously very problematic. However, here we see now in 13 a wrinkle or a twist. The belief that an individual or a nation is being led by some power, whether physical or spiritual, which exists on a lower level than the all-encompassing creator, is not prohibited as long as no worship is associated with said belief. So we just went through a whole list of like, no. And here you come, Chazi, and say, well, guess what? Really, it's potentially okay. So what are we talking about over here? Is this true or not? So this is a conversation, again, talking to people where they are at the different levels of their interpretation. And it is true that nature does have power, right? The moon affects our tides, the sun, we have photosynthesis. So all these things are clearly very, very powerful. However, and this is also true about the constellations as well, right? The 12 constellations, so to speak, that we have. This also, in theory, has an effect on our life. The line we're seeing over here, what Judaism is saying, is that yes, that is true, that these powers exist, and there are people that associate themselves, like we said earlier, with the Native Americans or the First Nations, that they have these spirit animals that they associate with. The difference and the terminology is when you're looking at the 12 constellations or these powers that are running the world, that is what we call Elohim. And what we see in the Bible, that's called Elohim, God's power in nature. And it's okay for non-Jews and Noahides to recognize that and potentially even have a relationship with something like that. However, in Judaism, you have the 12 tribes, and that is through the Tetragrammaton, and that is experiencing life through God, right? And we spoke about this in the past, where God's wisdom is manifest through nature, and that's what the philosophers have managed to tap into. God's will is manifest through prophecy, and this is what he wants us and how he wants us to act. So here too, there is a discussion which is being very frank and open, saying, yes, if you're looking at the world through the eyes of nature, or how Paul Vanderklee likes doing this, like one eye, this thing he does. But if you're looking at it through nature, then it is going to be okay for you to recognize that there are other seemingly powers in this world. However, if you are looking at this through the 12 tribes, if you're looking at this through a Jewish vision, you're only going to be looking at the Tetragrammaton. And that's why the name Elohim is, in a certain sense, like what we say in the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, right? We both use the term Elokeinu and the Tetragrammaton, because we are letting the world know the God of nature that you guys see is ultimately the Tetragrammaton. It's all encased inside the Tetragrammaton, and we're waiting for the world to fully see that as well. But in the meantime, if Sandy wants to read her horoscope, there is room and place for that to happen. And one does not have to worry. I'm not saying that you do that, Sandy. One does not have to worry that they are playing around with idol worship at that level. Of course, if you have a picture of the sun god Ra in your house and you are pouring libations, lighting incense, and yes, then we're back into the worship level, and that is obviously problematic.
I have an odd question, and this can be for a separate discussion.
Sure.
Just as you're reading this and explaining it, the question that comes to mind is, how you phrased it and the distinction between Noahides and Jews, is that because, does this point exist for Noahides because Jews were actually taken out from the nations there, and the nations are still part of that world, therefore they're taken out from the world the way we understand it? That's what you're saying? Therefore,
that is correct, and that's why for Noahides, again, once you as you develop your relationship as a Noahide, then the more, like we said earlier, the more questions you ask, the more knowledge and wisdom you attain, there's a larger sense of responsibility for you with regards to that relationship. However, a good example of this would be the mages of Egypt, in Hebrew called the Khartoumim. So there's a midrash that they, in the stars, they saw that a leader will be born for the Jewish people. And they were very nervous about this. So they went to Pharaoh, and, you know, there's the story that Moses comes into the palace. They also test Moses out. And there's a certain sense where the mages were able to recognize in the world powers enough to see that there's going to be a leader, enough to identify potentially who that leader is, and then they try to co-opt that. However, ultimately, Moses, as being Hebrew, has to make his own decision. And when he goes out and to see his brothers suffering, there's a sense where he's going out to see, who are my brothers? Are my brothers the Egyptians? Are the brothers the Hebrews? And when he sees the Egyptian fighting with the Hebrew, with the Israelite, he says he looked on both ways and he saw there was no man there. And the sense was not that only that no one was looking, but rather there is nothing over here. The Egyptians they could only go so far even by looking through their constellations. And that's why he decides to bury the Egyptian in the sand. And that is supposed to be the whole concept of the whole Egyptian empire eventually will be buried in the sand as well. So did the mages not have power? Did Bilam, the prophet, not manage to see things? The answer is no. There is something over there. However, we are being invited into another level of conversation. And that's true as Jews because we are in this relationship, and it's an invitation for the Noahides as well.
Leave my question there for now.
If there's another question, obviously feel free to send me.
I said I'll leave my question there for now.
Okay.
But
We'll end with 14. Whoever believes there is any God ruling over the entire world other than the one creator of all is called a heretic, literally denier of the root of truth. So I know that this is what Jacob calls me all the time. I think he says it in jest. I believe in the root of truth. But this was alluding to what we were talking about earlier, Sandy, which is this sense of dualism. There's this famous story, which I'm sure I've mentioned, about the four who entered the Pardes, the mystical world of the Torah, and Rabbi Akiva tells them, don't assume you'll understand what you see. Don't jump to the first conclusion that comes to your head. And he gives them this example about, you're going to see these pillars of water. He says, don't say water, water. Don't assume what you're seeing is water. But one of them, Elisha ben Avuya, who we call the other, Acher, he goes inside and he saw, in his vision, he saw the angel. It's called Sarah Panim. It's one of the highest ranking angels called Metatron, and he was sitting on the throne of God, so to speak. And he then sees these two powers in heaven, so to speak, right? Evil and good. And this is very confusing for him. And he ultimately becomes a heretic. But the sense is to, again, when you're looking at the world, and it's important to remember, let me even open this up for a second. The line in Isaiah. Okay. That. I'm reading in Hebrew, then I'll say it in English. Yotzer or ubore choshech, oseh shalom ubore ra, ani Adonai oseh kol elu. Yes, I form the light, I create the darkness, I make woe or evil. I, God, do all these things, right? In our prayer book, they actually changed the word to evil into, we read now, God does everything. I think they were too nervous at the time when they were developing these prayers that it might be a little confusing for people to see that, or a lot for people to handle. But ultimately speaking, that's what the prophet is saying. The prophet is saying that God is creator of all these things. There isn't this dualism out there. And like we were saying, if God is angry at me, this isn't like the angry judgmental God necessarily, but this is only coming from love. And anyone that is looking at things that are happening in their life and is thinking that this is not from God or this is other from God, you are entering into a heretical place. And this is true to potentially even observant Jews, right? Why is this happening to me? Like that thought, which again, we're not saying if you have that thought, God's going to be like, oh, you did it again. There's human psychology. God is very, very understanding. But the idea is that kind of thought process or thinking that I just don't understand what's happening, or how could this be happening to me? That is, you are removing yourself from the understanding that God is all present everywhere at all times. And it all stems from him at the end of the day. So we're being told over here to be very, very sensitive to the fact that obviously thinking that there's another God or worshiping another God is a big no-no. But even the thought process of, maybe good things are coming from God and bad things are just evil things. No, these are all part of God's greater plan. Just to stress this point, even the horrible atrocities of October 7th, at the end of the day, these are all part of a larger story. And it behooves, and again, I don't look at it as punishment, but it behooves the Israeli nation to think what is going on, that this is going to be happening, and not to be like, this must be something else, but rather this is also part of a conversation that God is having with us. I understand that's very hard for people to hear, and that doesn't mean that one can't even be angry at God. It just means that that relationship is still having, and all these things are still God reaching out to us and talking to us. Sometimes a parent says no, which is also okay, but even no is an answer, and that doesn't mean no means non-existent. It just means maybe the answer was no. Sandy, Jonathan, any parting words?
I was just thinking that the difference between 13 and 14 are a bit subtle, right? Because on one hand, you can believe that an individual or nation is being led by some power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's slightly different than saying that there's a God ruling over the entire world other than the one creator. For instance, a lot of Christians believe that the devil rules the world. However, they would also admit that only through God's permission does that actually happen. So,
Not all Christians, though.
I mean, I don't think there's any Christians that would suggest that like that the devil's ruling over the world is outside of God's control.
That I agree. However, the devil has his own free will, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that's right. That is true. That's part of the.
So in that sense, it's sort of out of God's control, which obviously we see in Job. The Satan comes and joins the divine council and asks permission from God to do so. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So, which is like, yes, Judaism is saying there's a conversation about, we'll call it, let's say, the devil or evil inclination. However, all of that is happening through God and from God's permission, so to speak. Now, that could lead to obviously questions towards God, but it's all stemming from him. However, what's important about 13 is to recognize that it all stems from God. Right. Mm-hmm. In 14, it's more about where you start creating this dualism. If there's a separation, as long as you could connect needle to thread, you're still in the safe zone.
Yep.
And of course, even if you're at 13 and you're in the safe zone, as long as no worship is involved with that.
Yep.
And again, like I would say that just using again like the First Nations. So sitting down and talking about the spirit animals, you could say like kosher. Dancing around the fire and painting your face, less so. Lighting incense for that, definitely not, right? And that would be sort of where that wiggle room sort of comes in. Now, like we mentioned in the past, even the great rabbi, may he rest in peace, Rav Idan Steinsaltz even mentioned that there would potentially be reason to believe that even the Hindus can be considered Noahides, right? And that is going very far out, saying like all these gods ultimately, they meet together in Brahma, which all comes from one source. So that's why it would still be kosher. But that's just talking sort of about the mindset and not about any of the actions, the worship, the activities that happen sort of around that, which would be prohibited, because then you're really giving yourself up for sort of you're really submitting yourself to this other power, and not just recognizing that maybe there's other things out there, but you're not worshiping those things. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is like a very thin distinction over there that is important to flush out. Any thoughts or questions that you guys have, please do not hesitate to send my way. And if there's something that is above my pay grade, I will probably shoot up the ladder as well. The rabbis actually were asking me from Brit Olam if I wanted to have them come into one of these sessions, which obviously it's an open invitation for you guys. However, I was thinking that sort of at the end of Brit Olam, I would have them come in to give us sort of like the last lecture, and then we would do the same thing again with the prayer book. And I think it would be like nice to bring them in at that point. But again, if you guys felt that you guys had specific questions that you want me to shoot up to them, up the ladder, please do not hesitate to send it my way. And they've also made it very clear that they'll be happy to discuss as well. On that note, I bid you guys adieu. Have a fantastic week. And I hope you all find clarity in the things we're learning.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, all.
Goodbye, all.
Bye.
Oh, I'm still streaming here.